Good evening. I'm Tina Olson. I'm the director at the Williams College Museum of Art here. And it is my great pleasure to introduce Sarah Schultz. I have a few more than usual words of introduction because I've known Sarah a long time, and I felt like I had to give her due. So I first met Sarah probably around 2003, and she was director of education at the Walker, and I was a program officer at the Getty. And for any of you who haven't ever been program officers, and I'm guessing that's probably most of you, what program officers do, especially what my job was to figure out ways with money to make the field of art history and the field of museum practice, curatorial work, education work, better. And to do that, you end up talking to a lot of people. In fact, that's the only way that you can do your job, is by finding the smart people and then calling them all the time. So I found Sarah, and Sarah was one of those people. What you look for in those jobs, what I was always looking for, is I was looking for people who had a really broad perspective, who could sort of articulate ideas and trends and global developments in art history and in museum practice almost as they were happening. And not that many people can do that. So when you find those people, you really hug them. And Sarah was one of those people. So I would call Sarah all the time to help me figure out things about museum education and about curatorial work and about the intersections of artistic and curatorial practice and socially engaged practice and how any of that fit or didn't fit with museum engagement and, of course, community engagement and public engagement, too. So in those years, Sarah was inventing and making really subtle and sophisticated programs. She was making teen programs, school programs, interpretive programs, and I'm probably leaving some out. When the Walker opened its 2003 expansion, 2005 expansion, it had some signature Sarah Schultz things all over it. I know you weren't directly responsible for it, but it had that incredibly philosophical, perplexing, and wise dolphin that talked to you, the Dolphin Oracle 2. It was a kind of early experiment in AI. And it would talk to you, and then it would answer you in these sort of oblique ways. It also had its really renowned teen programs, which was, the Walker was really the first teen program, to my knowledge, that sought to marry teens interested in contemporary art with a sustained museum program. And a lot of that work and the genius of that program was Sarah. She also worked on K-12 programs and debuted really inventive and award-winning family programs like Raising Creative Kids. So Sarah became the Director of Education Community Programs at the Walker in 2000, and then in 2010, Director of Education and Curator of Public Practice. She was at the Walker altogether for 22 years. In 2009, she was appointed Museum Scholar at the Getty Research Institute, which she came up with a groundbreaking idea called Open Field, which debuted then in 2010. Open Field was a summer-long experiment in how museums can engage the public in new ways. It was inspired by models of the commons, by crowdsourcing, collective action, and new forms of socially engaged art practice. It opened the museum to the public and artists together by using 4 acres of adjacent green space to create a kind of alternative public park. I'm sure, and I hope that she'll talk about it today. And it ended up hosting hundreds of activities each summer season, created by and led by interested members of the public alongside invited artists and residents. It was so successful that it was repeated for 4 summers in a row, and it led to a book authored by Sarah called Open Field: Conversations on the Commons, which explores the meaning of public practice for cultural institutions. Since leaving the Walker, Sarah has worked as an independent curator. She's worked with the Philadelphia Mural Arts Program on a project called Southwest Roots, a series of projects and programs led by artists and community members that connected Philadelphia residents with the cultural and natural assets of Batram's Garden, the oldest botanical garden in the United States. Sarah is also currently serving as interim vice president of public programs and education at the High Line in New York City. She holds an MBA from the State University of New York Binghamton and an MA in art history from the University of Minnesota. She has written essays, a book, and presented at conferences all over the world. But it is really her work as a practitioner that will be her legacy. And there she has no peer. Please join me in welcoming Sarah Schultz.
Aww, that was so nice. This is like, it's like your life, huh?
Well, it was like my life. It's like I'm at my funeral. And it's nice. It's nice. I'm glad I could experience it. Well, thank you. Thank you, Tina. That was a beautiful introduction and made me a little teary. And I was, as part of my career at the Walker, I was head of public programs for 5 years. And so I've had to do many, many, many introductions and have been on the other side of this many, many, many times. And that was really quite lovely. And thank you for that. And the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put my timer on, because I also am a big believer in not talking too long. I do want to begin just by saying thank you. I am so grateful to be here. This, I think, is my third visit to your illustrious museum. And every time I come, I'm so impressed by all of the brilliant work that the whole staff has done, and Tina's brilliance. We're in the Mutual Admiration Society. She is really one of the most remarkably intelligent and inventive people I know, and you are all extraordinarily lucky to be here, and to have her, to have Nina, to have Sonnet, to have everybody here as a resource, and really pushing the idea of both what museums are about, but really what exhibitions can be, and really doing it in a way that makes them alive and, dare I say, even fun. And so I'm very grateful to be here, and I'm also grateful I had the chance to talk to several of you over the last couple of days in the grad program, and I was really grateful for that opportunity, both to learn about what you're doing, but also for the kind of curatorial therapy you provided me, as I was able to kind of process and complain about some things. So thank you for that. So what I wanted to talk about is, I'm not actually going to talk about socially engaged art practice per se. I am going to talk about the idea of what a curatorial role may be, and what the position or job of a curator, if there is even a job for a curator, in thinking about socially engaged art practice. I want to do this by talking specifically about two initiatives that I've worked on. Tina mentioned them both, the Walker's Project Open Field and the Project Southwest Roots that I'm currently working on at Bartram's Garden. And I'm going to talk about those initiatives, and then I'm also going to talk within it about their projects sort of nested within those initiatives. And I'm hoping through that we'll be able to get to some of these questions about what is a curator of public practice exactly. So I thought actually the first thing I need to tell you is, I am not a curator. And by this I mean I am not a curator, in quotation marks, and I am not a curator with a capital C. I am a curator of public practice. And I think in order to understand what this means, because I'm not entirely sure I can give you a definition, and this is something I've struggled with over the last 5 years that I've actually had this title, that if you all will just take some time tonight to think about these three words as we talk: the word curate, the word public, and the word practice, and ask yourself what you think those three things mean, and what you think those three things may mean to you. Because that's what I have been asking myself for the last 5 years. And in fact, what this is actually a title that I just made up to describe the work that I was already doing. And so here is the announcement of the fact that the Walker hired me after the 20 years I'd been there to be the new curator of public practice. So what was this work that I was already doing? Well, as Tina mentioned, I was the Director of Education and Community Programs at the Walker Art Center, which is a contemporary art center in Minneapolis, which is in Minnesota. And it's a multidisciplinary contemporary art center. And I was been the Director of Education for about 10 years. And I had, like I'm sure you're all familiar with museum education departments, I really ran what I called a cradle to grave department. So everything from programs with toddlers to programs for people who had Alzheimer's and their caregivers. And we really sort of operated under this kind of philosophy. It was a very straightforward philosophy that there are no dead objects, there are only living ideas. And so what this looked like is that it really became a practice that is, I would say, was very peopled. It was really thinking about how the museum was a peopled place. And here's a photograph of the Teen Arts Council. This was one of several art councils that we ran over the years. But really thinking about how the museum could be a place for all different kinds of people from all different kinds of backgrounds. It was a practice that was really participatory. These are unfortunately bad slides of what was a really fun project, which was a drawing studio in an Edward Hopper exhibition where we had live models come and did live drawing. And also really kind of sneaking in an element of populism. So I was really instrumental in creating the Walker's Artist Design Miniature Golf Course, which is an idea we totally stole from somebody else, but did for several years in various iterations when the museum was closed for construction or when we first opened and there was nothing on the field. And it continues on. The Walkers continue to do it now in large part because it also happens to be an incredible revenue generator for the museum. But that's not why we did it when we started. So all of these kinds of ways of working really came together and found this kind of happy home and an opportunity I had in 2010 I had gone to the Getty and I had done a sabbatical thinking that I wasn't sure what kind of museum educator I wanted to be anymore. And I really spent a lot of time reading about socially engaged art practice and really meeting a lot of artists in LA. And LA was a really kind of fundamental city and that was a fundamental time for me to really imagine how museum education could look differently. So the Walker had a problem, and it had a problem it wanted to solve. We had a 4.5-acre field adjacent to the institution that had been value engineered out of the opening of the new building and had remained vacant. And we were trying to think about what we could do in it. And in thinking about it, we really looked backwards at all of the work we had done, all of the kinds of social experiments and research we had done. So everything from things that happened in the gallery, so yoga, toddler yoga, exhibitions that had interactive components to things that we did also outside the gallery or even in the city. And on the far right, you'll see that's a kind of filmmaking project. I can't remember the name of the artist. It was a skateboarder filmmaker, and he was working with the teens and they were making projects. Also, we had done a large research project that remained very theoretical, that was really looking about how the museum could be a town square. We had developed again, a theoretical model that we meant to sort of apply that was a socially engaged approach to cultural programming, where it really saw the museum and the artist as a container or a convener, a connector, and a catalyst. And this was one of these really interesting thought experiments that ended up really kind of in a drawer and not really manifest. We also looked at what civic engagement might look like, because we all felt that we had held these assumptions about what civic engagement was, and really not really thinking through about the different ways in which we enact or act in the public sphere. So in theory, it really brought together these things we were thinking about. It was the time when Nina Simon was coming out with the Participatory Museum. Everyone was talking about Web 2.0, participatory culture, artistic practice was shifting, and I was really interested in commons theory, and because we had a field. What belongs in a field, like sheep? When you see a field, what do you think of? You think of sheep in a field, which leads you to the idea of the commons. There's a little bit of truth in that. And in practice, it really was this kind of very straightforward idea of what would happen at the intersection of bringing artists, the public, and the institution together to share a space and program a space and collectively own the idea of a space. So we convened a group of people to do a design charrette and propose ideas for the field. We identified potential problems. The field was very barren and awful. Somebody called it our ugly baby. And of course, we identified the most important thing you need to construct a social space. And then we looked at all the physical barriers. Then we thought about the people barriers. How would interactions look like? And we would have artists who were provocateurs and cool people on the field. And they would all sort of interact in this kind of onion-like, or I don't even know, like spiral way. I don't know what this drawing was, but that's what was going to happen. And then we thought about what we would need. Like, why would you come here? What would you do? It was an open, sunny space. There'd be wind. We'd have hammocks. There'd be umbrellas. And then we actually did it. We took the ideas, we took up some of the better drawings, we took up some of the better ideas, and we created a space adjacent to the museum. And the most important idea that came out of that conversation was I originally was going to program it as though it were a school and have people send me ideas, and we would go through and curate the ideas, and we'd create this public school. And one of the artists said, "You're just doing the same thing you always do, but outside. You're just like reinscribing, the authority of the museum on the outside." He said, "Everything has to be unmediated." And so we said, okay. So we created this field, we created the space, and then we started thinking about, and actually this is a little bit in hindsight, but we actually created what we would call strategies of engagement. Now we had this field, we had this space, how were we going to animate it? And so we developed in hindsight these strategies I called tools, rules, greeting, meeting, and seeding. I like rhyming and alliteration as well. So tools were really, we created a tool shed. This was just ways that people could come on the field and have a good time themselves. And we created this tool shed with all kinds of recreational and art making equipment in it. We created a website where people could post what they were going to do and share and announce it with each other and then bring all the information together. We gave people signage so they can make their own signs, and that is in fact a guitar pencil, in case you were wondering. And then we established rules because a blank slate is very unnerving, a blank canvas is very unnerving. People need to know what they can and can't do, and we thought a lot about how to articulate that. In the second year, we moved away from the idea of rules and realized that what we were really talking about was etiquette. That everyone was going to collectively own the space, we needed to have these guidelines for how they could protect the spirit, protect the space, and protect the people. Greeting was very, very important. It's like, how do you welcome somebody into a space? One of the rules we had is we never wore our lanyards. We never wore anything that would sort of identify us as a walker staff person. And we were out there at every event and every night, hosting people and hanging out. We created signage that looked very different from traditional museum signage. To sort of signal that there's a different kind of space. And then we also provided opportunities for people just to meet, because we know that not everyone is a programmer, not everyone wants to create their own event, and there needed to be some sort of continuity, in a way just to kind of drop in and drop out if you wanted to. And places for people just to sit and gather. And people would make their own makeshift places, somebody having a picnic in front of a sign that an artist had done from one of their projects. Thought a lot about time of day. It had to work in the winter, which in Minnesota is bad. Had to work in the summer, had to work in day, had to work at night. Had to think about it with a few people, and then had to think about how it would work with many people. And then we really had to think about what we were going to do with this juxtaposition of activities. Some activities were organized by people, the community. They may be artists, they may not be artists, and some were art. And so all of these things had to live on the field together. The pickle, by the way, is the not art, and the sheep is actually an art project by Machine Project. It's the first, the sheep are being mic'd while they chew grass. So art and not art. Seating was also really important, like modeling what you wanted people to do. No, we had never done this before. The museum had never done it before. People didn't know you could do it in a museum. Like, how would you even know what was possible? So we kind of sent our secret programmers out to do projects, take pictures and post them and say, look, you could do this. This was a group of students practicing. They would practice Suzuki violin at sunset. It was beautiful. And this sort of codified itself into this idea of you seat it and then you seat it, which all became this idea of power to the people. So if you ever see me speak, you'll know I show this slide in every single presentation I do, regardless of the topic. And so what happens when you turn it over and you say you can come and do what you want? People offer bullwhip lessons. Oh, I should also say, we also had curated artist projects in there. It was this commingling of things. So I'm just going to go through an example of what we've done. And you can guess if it's an artist project, community project. So bullwhipping lessons, live action role play extravaganza battle, iron pour, probably not the most appropriate use of the James Turrell Sky Pesher space, but concerts. We did experimental music concerts in the Walker's parking garage, called Music for Parking Garages. People did things that are very recognizable. We had a group of yarn bombers come and teach knitting every week and then do these extravagant giveaways at the end of the summer. We had art swaps. I say we, people brought their art swaps there. Some inventive artists actually once gave a gondola ride under the Spoon Bridge in Cherry, which they really weren't supposed to do, but it was a really good idea. We hosted an opera for dogs that was for dogs, starring dogs with live human accompaniment. These are by Machine Project in LA hosted a lot of these. This was another part of that 3-part concert. The first began with the sound of sheep chewing the grass, and then the third piece was people signed up with their reel mowers, and we attached bells to them. This is by the artist Chris Kallmeyer, and we didn't mow the grass for 2 weeks, and then we mowed the grass in 3 groups of. It was choreographed for 26 minutes. We mowed the grass while 200 people watched us. We built a schoolhouse out of surplus materials. This is Red 76. We had a design group actually reproduce works from the Walker's collection into a gallery outside with chainsaws. There was a lot of play on the field. It was a very playful place. We played together. And we relaxed together. This is guerrilla yoga. And then we wrote love letters together and sent them to random strangers from the phone book. And then we also did things like teach children how to break into cars. And this, again, was another machine. It's called Car Breaking Workshop for Kids. And I don't have a slide of it, but this is how we taught them. Like, you have to have a car with a mechanical lock. So, one of the things you'll learn as a social practice curator is like how to source things. And then we had to find the right kind of car so that with a mechanical lock. And then the trunk also had a mechanical lock. So we would lock kids in the trunk. And then we taught them how to get out of the trunk. So, and I also want you to know it was 102 degrees this day. And so to make a kind of rangy project rangier, I would also nest experiments within experiments. So I used the idea of the platform as an excuse to try other things. And I did something called Field Office, where I really wanted to support the work of young artists, or artists who are experimenting in their own right. So everything on Open Field, no one was paid to do anything on Open Field. Everything, it was a commons. Everything was a gift to one another, except that the artist commissions were paid commissions. So there are a lot of structural issues that I'm happy to debate in all of this, because we certainly did. But with Field Office, I really wanted to help advance and support the work of artists who were locally who were interested in the public sphere. So we gave 10 people $500, and they use the money to design some kind of project that that happened either at the Walker or somewhere else in the city, and then they came back together as a cohort and we just shared the information with each other. This was actually an interesting project where it was called the Bank of Our Commonwealth, and for $1 you could put $1 in the bank, and Rachel would sew it on a very long string of dollar bills, and you got a certificate. You signed the book and got a certificate saying you'd invested in the Bank of Commonwealth. It was actually quite a beautiful project. I thought a lot about how the outside of the institution related to the inside of the institution, because it actually in many ways didn't. It functioned like a shadow institution or an alternative institution or an institution in dialogue, a space that was in dialogue with the museum. And so one year I did something called Flux Field, where we had an exhibition of work by Fluxus artists, and I invited artists to come in, study the collection, and then again supported them to kind of create their own inventive projects. As part of it, we also brought in some Fluxus artists. We brought in Allison Knowles, who did her Make a Salad, Proposition Number 1 Make a Salad, who did the piece called Proposition Number 1 for the Field. And if you're not familiar with this work, it's a Fluxus score that says make a salad. And she's a very specific ritual that goes around with it, but you make this giant salad together and then everybody eats it. They did something called Fluxus Drawing Club. One guy did this insane like Fluxus Running Club that had these little things that you played with, and it just set everybody off in 100 different directions. Until they eventually found their way back. And then what happened, and then the one last thing that happened that was a surprise. As part of the whole Open Field system of benign neglect that anyone can do what they want, I had somebody in my office say, could they have an internet cat video festival? And I said, I think that'd be a really great idea, because I think like we could show it like on a screen on the wall, and we get like 150 people there, and that'd be a really good number, for us, like at the end of the year. And so we did this, and she actually wanted to crowdsource it, this idea of crowdsourcing. So we crowdsourced nominations for the best cat video on the internet. And as it turns out, 10,000 people submitted videos. Nominations. So then we started to get nervous that there might not be 150 people actually coming to the event. And so we planned a little better, and it turns out cat videos are popular because 10,000 people showed up on Open Field. And they actually shut down traffic on the internet. This was something, there's no way anything we ever could have anticipated this, right? There's no way you'd ever, it was and she's like, what? And like, really? 10,000 people showed up. And I want you to know, the Republican National Convention was the same night in Minneapolis, okay? This warrants its own. This is an enormously, I have to tell you, this project changed my life in many, many ways. Many ways, including the fact that I started watching cat videos. We also got a spread in the New York Times. And then we did it again at the State Fair for 12,000 people. And it's an audience development tool. This was the audience for the Internet Cat Video Festival. This project was so complicated within the institution for so many reasons that I felt like as I was thinking about how to deal with it, I finally had to work on a book about why people watch cat videos. And we commissioned writers and cultural critics, like real writers and cultural critics and poets and very smart people to sort of meditate on what the power of cat videos was. This was like a way for me to sort of like redeem something from this, you know, this thing. The other project, so then that was then at the Walker. Thank you. That was then at the Walker, and this is now. So right now I'm working on a project in Philadelphia called Southwest Roots, which is a creative placemaking project. And this is the first time I've actually done this kind of work, not in a museum, but in a different cultural setting. And Bartram's Garden is a city park, and a historic home and garden that's on the Schuylkill River in a very industrial part of Philadelphia, and sort of is adjacent to a very under-resourced neighborhood. And the goal of this project really, ultimately, when we talk about creative placemaking, the goal of this project is really about getting to know people and really understanding what it means to be a neighbor and neighbors with somebody, and what the adjacencies are of different kinds of people and different kinds of communities. So how I structured this, again, in an initiative way, I've been working with artists. The first project was with an artist named Katie Backler called Listening School, where she really built this cart and this model and worked with 12 kids and went around the neighborhood in the garden, literally listening and talking with people about what was special to them about their neighborhood and what was special to them about the park. This gives you a sense of what this was like. And then the kids actually, at the end of it, really developed a sense of ownership over the space. And it's a tidal river. So there's this secret beach, and they started spending a lot of time on the beach and created a map for people about the beach. Then and as a way to get to know people, not every project was artist driven. This was something where the garden was already doing really interesting work with an urban farm and a youth leadership program. So we sort of amended the kinds of resources attached to it and brought some artists in, and we've been working in the community on a project to have people in their front yards and their backyards build their own gardens. And really a project around food justice. And then also doing a lot of work with neighborhood cleanup, and then doing a project where we collected stories and made these recipe cards about people in the with recipes and stories about people in the neighborhood. And then the last piece I just want to mention is something called the Neighborhood Yes Fund. So one of the challenges in projects, and I want to say projects like this, but particularly outside of a museum, and particularly when you're dealing with this concept of creative placemaking, is that this neighborhood is not a place that needs to be made. It's a place that already exists. It's just that we may not understand who is there and what it is, and that's our problem. And so one thing we did here was actually really try to create space and opportunity for the people in the community to tell us and to show us and for us to be able to see what they were already doing. So we created a micro grant project called the Neighborhood Yes Fund, and we basically offered $500 stipends to people who were already doing work in the neighborhood around the idea of youth engagement, connections with nature, creative expression, we didn't call it art, and community well-being. And we funded 15 projects last summer. And there was an application form that people had to fill out, although ultimately the idea was never to say no to anybody. And so we did things like we supported projects where youth were making videos about the neighborhood. There was a festival, a hip hop festival. We supported health fairs that they were doing. A basketball tournament at one of the public housing sites, basketball league actually, for the summer. And then at the end we brought everybody together. The one commitment you had in participating in this is you didn't have to write a report, you didn't even really have to tell us how you spent the money, but you had to come to a picnic. And at the picnic you had to share with each other what you were doing and what you had done and what you had learned, because one of the things we realized is that a lot of neighbors didn't even know each other. And so out of this came this cohort. Everybody also got like a bouquet of flowers because it was a botanical garden. But out of this came a cohort where they actually at that moment challenged us back and said, if we work together, can can we have project support that's larger? If we do something, can we have more money if we do something together? And we said yes, and they're actually right now in the process of figuring out what those larger projects will be. So again, this was a way to be responsive. And then the last thing we did, so last year the community wanted to do a family-friendly hip-hop concert because there are a lot of spoken word artists and a lot of performers in the neighborhood. So they organized a concert actually at the garden. And you can get a sense of what this was. And out of that, because there wasn't money to continue the project, they actually wrote a mission statement themselves and are using this to fundraise. And so out of this they developed a community mission statement, which is really quite a moving document. And I think also shows really the connection that they have. I don't even know that we help foster, but they actually have with the space and sentences like, we nourish human development by connecting our fellow residents to Mother Earth and her nature. And this really the sense of what it is they want for themselves. So from this, all of this and this opportunity has caused me really to reflect on, this is a mission statement. I started to think about what my values were, and from these kinds of projects, what values I take into any project I do, any project, if it's a small project at the High Line, if it's something big. And I realized that these are sort of the things that I carry with me, whether I've ever articulated them like this or not. The idea that there are many art worlds, embrace more than one. And coming from a contemporary art museum, that was a really important lesson. Like, who's an artist and who's not an artist. Be both a practitioner and a participant. You have to live the project. You have to live it. You can't just do it. You've got to be in it. And you are a participant in it, and you will be changed by it. Share your power and privilege. You have power, you have privilege, probably by virtue of the platform you have or access to the resources you have. How can you use that power and privilege for the benefit of all? No one gets hurt, and I mean that physically. I really don't like it if people get hurt. And also that idea of protect the spirit, protect the space, protect the people. And don't forget to have fun, right? That this is really supposed to be fun. I'm not going to go through this, but as I was going through this could be another point of conversation. I started to make a checklist for myself, like questions that I wish I would take the time to answer before I actually started something, instead of asking myself halfway along the way. And that's everything with, what are you working with and why? What is the role of the artist in the process? How does the artist fit in? Because there's really this spectrum of socially engaged art practice. And some artists are artists, and others are community-based artists, and other are artists who are just like interested in trying to figure out how to work in the public sphere. Who, and how do they fit into this project? Are they leading the project? Are they a collaborator? Are you asking them, in the case, to be a catalyst for other people? You kind of have to know that. Where is the artist in their own practice? What's the role of the community? What's your role? What is the relational work you want to be doing? Like in the case of Bartram's Garden, it really actually wasn't about creating these large-scale art projects. It really was about trying to foster the sense of being neighbors. How do you know if you're successful? And are you prepared? Are you prepared? Because the answer is no, you are not, and you never will be. But you can kid yourself and think you are. What's in it for everybody? Like, everybody has to get something out of this. This is like having a dinner party where you want everybody to leave happy, okay? Except you. Your happiness is not very paramount in this, but everybody else's happiness kind of is. That's a little harsh. I mean, that probably has a lot to do with me. That I want everybody to be happy. What's left behind? Have we think about how things end? Have we thought about documentation? Have we thought about archives? Have we thought about closure? Have we thought about a celebration? Have we thought about having a cake at the end? What do you swear you will do definitely next time? And will you ever remember it? And then what is your next project? So to go back, just to kind of wrap up and go back to those 3 words, because all of this really led me to think so long and hard about those 3 words. So for me, the idea of curate is not to organize or present or select, but it really is that idea of the root of curate, which is cura, which means to care for, like a curate in a parish, to care for souls, to care. And when I think about how I care, I think that my practice of caring is really thinking about holding time and space for people to be conscious and attentive. That is my act of curation, my act of caring. With public, I think of a public is such a complex word. It's so fraught. There's no simple definition of it. But I think of it as a whole, of a whole, not consensus, not at all consensus, but what we have in common, something that's communal, of being visible to one another and being seen by one another. And then lastly, practice, which the literal definition is work on or work at habitually and regularly, that this is not, I specifically didn't choose engagement. I was not a curator of public engagement. I was a curator of public practice, because this was really about something we were going to work at. And we were going to work at over and over and over again. This has really been a very important, I keep this on my wall, it's been a very, very, very important quote for me and a very important idea throughout my career, that art is this sort of experimental station in which one tries out living. And I think this is actually what I mean by being a curator of public practice. And then I would say, if I want to actually make this statement my own, I think what I really mean by being a curator of public practice is art is a sort of experimental station in which we try out living together. Thank you for being here.
I'm interested in the fact of so much of this work residing in a space of adjacency. You mentioned that word many times, and when I think about the walker and the field, and even historically the idea of a commons as being a space that's actually on the side,
Right.
And that kind of para position.
Right.
And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about that. I'd love to hear if you've thought at all about it not happening inside the museum, but happening beside the museum.
I have thought about that, and actually that's actually a really interesting point and a very good question. And I want to remember to go back to the idea of an ecotone, like ecosystems and ecotone, because I think a lot in those kinds of metaphors. But I think with open field, open field happened outside because it actually couldn't happen inside, right? It was, for the institution to take the leap to invite yarn bombers in on Thursday night to do, there were so many things that couldn't happen inside. The museum's it's not that kind of flexible open space, right? And so I think part of what we were trying to do with open field, and I didn't really realize it until we were done with the first year, is it was never meant to be an audience development tool, because it was always meant to be an audience perception shifter and an institution perception shifter. Like, what could something possibly be other than the thing that it was? And so the fact that they had those adjacencies, that tension, actually was for me very interesting, and sometimes it was very tense because the field was free but the walker was $10. And so at the end we ended up doing most of our programs on our free nights so that you had that porosity. And then because we were doing it on our free program nights, we'd start to sneak people into the cafe, right? So the yarn bombers would meet in the cafe because it was like July in Minnesota. It was like horrible, it's so humid and awful. And then once there, then we'd have artists, and then the artist would want to be like inside and outside, because they kind of want to be inside, like everybody kind of wants to be inside. So it was thinking about this idea of what cultural, then we really started thinking about like what cultural capital is, right? And that we had all these people doing stuff on the outside, there's stuff on the inside, and at one point we actually, a bunch of artists would start writing that they had done programs at the Walker Art Center on their applications for grants. And that got back to somebody, and there was like a flash of concern, and I'm like, but they were programmers. They were programmers of open field. That's a legitimate thing to say. And it really got me thinking a lot about capital. You know, cultural capital and social capital. And the thing is, the fact is, museums can, art museums in particular, hold on to their capital like it's like this, like it's finite and like so precious. But the fact of the matter is they wouldn't have it unless people came to the museum. So it's actually like, it is actually something that we all generate together. And we need to think a little bit more about how we share it and not think it's so precious. So that adjacency was obviously very intentional and really, really, really important. With Bartram's Garden, I think with like a lot of placemaking projects, it is this, again, this like I get back to this ecotone, this like juxtaposition of ecosystems and people together, and how you start to, what the relationship is between those things. So I think those adjacencies are sometimes like built into some of these projects, because so much of it is about connecting. So it's like you usually are connecting, oftentimes at the local level, you're connecting in adjacent spaces.
How does a museum try to see what has been invisible? You know what I mean? How do you figure out your blind spots and then try to not have them be blind spots anymore?
Oh my God. Any of my museum colleagues are welcome to join in, and this could be a collaborative answer, please. Let's
hire a consultant.
You could hire a consultant.
Answer it inside.
Right? I mean, well, I think first of all, it's always hard to see your own blind spot, right? For example, it's why the Walker started a teen council, right? It was not just to make a space for the teens, but the teens ended up having like enormous influence, right? As like these kind of insider-outsiders. I think that you have to, I think you also have to be open to wanting to see your blind spot. And then once you see it, you have to be willing to look at it and then potentially willing to do something about it. And I think it's incredibly, I don't want to say it's like incredibly hard, but it can be incredibly hard. And I think we talked a little bit about this, like, I think museums are always becoming. They're never anything. I think sometimes we have this idea that we just keep moving along and one day we'll figure out the museum and then it'll be the museum. But it's not. It's actually, the museum is a process, right? And it's a process that's always becoming something, and it's always responsive to something. This is not really a good answer, I'm sorry. I feel like, but I think it's just a really hard question, and I think different museums do it differently. And you can bring in consultants. You can invite your I mean, the first few years I was at the Walker, there was a real concerted effort to think of itself as much more community. This is in the 90s, a much more community-connected space. And I would sit in community meetings, and the responses to all of it were really harsh and hard to hear. I mean, it really toughened me to realize how much baggage, like I didn't even see the baggage, right?
I think you're saying there was some sort of institutional pushback against the cat video project. Yeah. Could you expand on that a little bit?
So, sure. You're an internationally known, serious contemporary art center. And you've got an internationally known serious film program. And then you become the first place in the world, and a contemporary art center, to host an internet cat video festival. And then people are confused, like, is your film department doing that? Are you, like, what's happening there? Like, that's not serious, that's not, like, what? And then you get a lot of attention for it. a lot of attention. I can't even tell you after we did that announcement about the nominations, we had press calling us from Brazil, from Singapore, the LA Times, like all over. Like we had TV, right? And I mean, it clearly was it was like the 15 minutes of fame. It was that. And then we got that fold in the New York Times. The Walker had not had a fold they didn't even have a fold like that for the opening of its expansion, right? And it was for internet cat videos, right? And then it was so much fun. And then what even made it worse is like so much fun. Like it was so much fun. I can't even tell you, like I was shaking. I met the girl who did kittens, kittens inspired by kittens. Like I was like, oh my God, you're Maddie. You made that video. I was like shaking. Little Bob was there. I mean, like it was like mayhem and then when you're done, like 10,000 people come, and then everyone's like, "Are you going to do it again?" And you're going to say, "No, we're not going to do it again," because you're like, "Of course we're going to do it again, and we're going to do it in the grandstand," and then it gets even bigger, and it's a source of tension in an institution. Like, what do you want to be known for? And I mean, I understand it. The thing is, I do understand it, but at the same time, it was really, really, really fun. And the Walker did it for a few years, and then I think they very gracefully found a way to turn it over. They actually, Will Braden, who does if you're a cat video aficionados, does Henri, right? Like Henri. He actually takes it over and runs it now. So it still exists. So it was a launching pad. But actually out of that was one of the mantras that we came up with as a team, which is all audiences count. And here's one of the sneaky things about museums. They want people to come in, they want people to participate, but they secretly want people to participate the way they want them to participate. They want them to stand in front of a work of art by themselves, understand it, having like whatever background they have, and have a transformative epiphany, and feel uplifted and a better human being, and then leave, right? And that's nirvana. Like that's what you step people up to. And what I realized in all of this is something I intuited as an education director, but didn't really understand. Everybody who came to that Internet Cat Video Festival, everybody who comes to mini golf, everybody who comes to a family day, anybody who comes to any program has a Walker experience. That is a Walker experience. That is a museum experience. And that is their experience. It's not necessarily about getting them to the next level. It's about thinking about what kinds of experiences you create for people. They may go deeper, and they may not go deeper. But I think as institutions, we need to stop that secret judgment of how people engage with our institutions. So that was my big takeaway. Like everybody there was a Walker audience member. It had nothing to do with getting them to come back in for a show. So I actually feel really strongly about that. And I know this is being audio taped, right, and sent around the world. That was a source of tension.
Very early on, you used the expression, an air of populism, bringing an air of populism into the museum, that being part of your goal. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what that kind of air feels like to you, or what, kind of how you're kind of envisioning, or how you envision that, like what that process is, what the kind of, what it feels like. Again, the way I'm kind of thinking about it is, what does it feel like to you when there is more of that air?
Right, and I'm not even sure, it's like I threw that out, and it's like, I think we could sort of mine what we mean by populism. I think what I mean by that is this sort of relaxing of expectations about what a museum experience should be, right? And then in fact, it can be a place that can have a sense of humor. I mean, imagine museums that have a pointed sense of humor, as well as a viewpoint. It can be a place where you could have fun. I, as a graduate student, did a double major I was an art history graduate student and did American art history, but I also did American studies because I was very interested in popular culture and I couldn't quite figure out which side of the culture I wanted to be on. And then I realized that sometimes you don't have to choose. Like, we're idiosyncratic in our tastes. We don't just like one form, we like multiple kinds of things. And I'm kind of interested in museums as spaces that mix that up because they're museums are context generators. That's what they do. They have content, but really what they do is they create context and frames and ways of thinking. So I think for me that air of populism was also, and I'm also interested in points of tension. So the idea for me of being able to see a Merce Cunningham show and then go play mini golf and be able to do both of those things just seemed really interesting to me. And I wasn't quite sure how people would take away from that, but it could be something really interesting. Does that make sense?
I had a question, but it's really meandering, and it has to do with open field, and it has to do with the question we started with, which was the question about adjacency, right? And that open field is not inside; it's outside. So I guess what I am thinking about is open field and sustainability.
Yeah.
And to what extent, I think you've been really clear and really articulate in all of your years of talking about it, that it really is other, and that it's metrics for success, for pleasure, for aesthetics, for anything you want to say are not like the walker isn't the origin of those, right?
Right.
Open field exists as its own thing. So I guess I'm asking in the end, like, is that true? And does it matter that open field is not around anymore? And how do you feel about that?
Okay.
What did you want?
It's a trick question. It was a trick question. Okay, but you threw me the ball, so I'm gonna deal with it. So I think Tina kind of knows some of the answer to this question, but so open field was really meant to be an experiment, and it kind of worked, and it was interesting, and we wanted to keep going with it. And I think it was clear that for many reasons it was going to run its course as a program. But what had happened over the years is that really stuff started happening inside, and we started capturing that spirit. Like we turned it into a verb. It's like, how can we open field that? I know, we've got, public programs in January. It's like 25 degrees below zero. How can we open field the month of January? We'll do a program called Cabin Fever, and we'll invite Lexa Walsh, and we'll invite Machine Project back, and we'll make butter, doing butter aerobics, and we'll do like all this fun stuff in the institution. We'll think about how we invite people, like we started to shift how we did our family programs, and we had more ways where we found ways in which we can invite different kinds of people to do programs in the institution. And so it began, I think that what ceased to be less necessary is that spirit started to invade at least our work in education. And when I took the title Curator of Public Practice, in part, I wanted to be a curator because I wanted my work to be seen on par with everything else the museum was doing, because it was on par with, it was as important and on par as, and it really was a form of curating, but it really was on par. But I also, with the public practice piece, I actually wanted the whole department, the whole museum education department, to be called public practice. I wanted for us to think of ourselves as a public practice. And I really, in my time there, fostered a team where the family programs and the teen programs, like everybody was like a studio, right? And it just like people filtered ideas and we shared a sensibility. And in the end, then you start to up your game. I had proposed a project where we would, do something called Civic Lab, where we'd spend 18 months and bring all kinds of people in and work on like social problems together. And I started to have bigger ambitions. And so I think in that regard, I think it was a very successful test for what I wanted the museum to be. And I think there came a point where it stretched the institution farther than the institution actually wanted to go. And so at that time, I mean, that was part of my decision of leaving, was that I had done what I set out to do, and I had ideas about the museum, and there wasn't the same room there, and I don't fault anybody for that. I mean, I realized the kind of work I wanted to do maybe didn't even fit as well in an institution like that. Maybe I had become para-institutional, right? And I had become para-institutional. So I think that's, but I do think it's shifted. I mean, I think it definitely shifted like a sensibility and tone, and it gave people a different perception of the Walker, and it made it a much more porous institution, which I still think exists today.
Sarah, do you think your work has changed since November 2016? Or how has
my work changed
or how has the work?
Right,
yeah, not
sure.
just your work.
Right. In November 2016, like everything changed, right? And it is like, what do you do now? Yeah, I mean, I think it would be really hard for me to like invest a lot of time and energy in doing an internet cat video festival right now. I think that I would have a hard time really like, absolutely. And I think the work that I'm doing in Bartram's has been very influenced. I mean, it already was heading in that direction, but I think I have a much deeper commitment to this idea of sharing power and privilege when I can, and like, how does the world become a better place? The one thing that I'm coming back to, it's sort of, like all the fun went out of everything in November 2016. But I think it's like, I think for all of us, it's made me much more conscious and aware in ways that I think are only good, as like becoming a good human being. But I think one thing we can't forget is we can't forget the incredible importance of joy. Like, joy is really important. We all deserve that. We all deserve to make that with each other. And having fun and beauty, like all of these things actually really matter, and they matter to us to like live together. And so I think there's a way in times of crisis and times like this that everything can feel serious and urgent, and it is, but we can't remember to like be joyful, right? And be happy. So that's where I'm kind of, I'm trying to figure out what the work looks like, right? And how to talk about it maybe a little differently. So, I mean, do you feel like your work's, this is a colleague of mine who's in the audience who works in another major New York institution. Do you feel like your work's changed?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Like, it hasn't, like it's like it's all changed.
I mean, I don't think the cats are unrelated, I mean, that there was that groundswell, that you didn't expect.
Yeah.
I mean, that November 2016 was another groundswell that we didn't expect. I think there's
Right.
things to be learned about, like, what, I think visibility is another question, I mean, like, how do you know who you don't know?
Right. Right.
And I'm trying to think of the other things that you said. I think the answer is in the things that you were already
Right.
talking about.
Right.
The success. And so I'm just trying. I do think infrastructure, though, is a question I had for you that also we're talking about now. So I don't think that. I don't know if the work has changed. I think the work is still the work. It still needs to be done.
Right.
And you still need to do it every day, and you still
Right.
need to care.
Right.
It's just, Open Field was amazing, American Tech was amazing, but like I don't know who the conversations are not happening with. I guess that's sort of the You know, I feel like I have to do things have to be different.
Things have to be different.
I can't just do the things I thought I was doing that were working, you know?
Right. No, everything's different. You can't.
So it's about finding that next unknown place, you know?
Right.
And I do think in the museum world, I mean, I think museums, there are museums who are responding. I mean, I think museums are responding in really interesting ways. I mean, some of the things that have happened, and I think it was a groundswell. November 2016 was a groundswell, and I think it's going to reshape It's going to reshape a lot of things, and I think in ways that are really are going to be really positive, right? Necessity is the mother of invention, right? And you all are going to be those people who are inventing it. Okay? So thank you for that, and thank you for this.